Hey you guys, it's Miss Arneson. I think this is my fourth time trying to make this video for this lesson. I have made it and deleted it a whole bunch of times because it was too long. So I'm going to try to make this really short. What we're going to be talking about in this lesson is evaluating sources of information. There's a lot of really important reasons to do that. I hope you recognize some of those reasons. For example, people haven't been getting good information on the COVID, and now we have, in the United States, we have really, really bad COVID statistics compared to the rest of the world. And that's because people have been trusting bad sources of information. It's also important for you in your life. Honestly, this is like the biggest life skill I can give you, figuring out what's true or not. You don't have to always have to figure out what's true. Like you don't always have to pay attention to if what you're doing is accurate. But when you're doing something that you're going to base a decision on, like who to vote for or what medical procedure to get or where to buy a house, you need to know things like about flood zones if you're going to buy a house, because if you buy a house in a flood zone, then like you're you could like lose all of your money because flood insurance is very expensive and a lot of places won't cover it, and then sometimes they don't give you everything back. So you just need to be able to have all of these skills for looking for good information about what you're doing. Entertainment, you don't really need good resources. I love sci-fi. Sci-fi is never, well, I mean it's based on real science and like the future of science, but it's always like fake stories, you know. And so when you're doing entertainment, you don't necessarily have to worry about that. But if you are writing a paper, if you're deciding who to vote for, if you're making a decision about what to spend your money on, you do need to be able to find good information. And so I found this test from the university called Western University. It's in Canada. There's also a Western in the United States, but this is the Canadian one. That's why I put the comma there. And the test, I picked it because I looked at a lot of these things over the day. I picked this one because it's called CRAAP, and I just think that's funny and easy to remember because we're looking for fake news and crap information, so it's helpful to remember. The CRAAP stands for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. And you're going to be using this resource right here, so you can find this in the assignment. You can click on it and it's going to help you figure out if a source is credible or not. So I want to kind of go through each of these sections and give you some like rules basically. And then of course this has an ed puzzle so you can answer those questions as you go through the video. So the first thing is currency. And that means the timeliness of your information. So when was the information published? How has it been revised or updated? Is it current or out of date? And one of the ways to tell about that is, are the links working? So if it was posted a long time ago, a lot of times the links won't work anymore. But then, of course, you can also look for the date on it. If you're doing research for history or English class, sometimes you're going to be using really old resources, like they're called primary source resources. But in science, we are always going to be looking for things that were published within the last 10 years. And sometimes 10 years ago is really old. Like if you were looking at information about COVID from 10 years ago, you'd be really hard to find it, right? You wouldn't be able to really get something. So that information is like weeks. It's just been made weeks ago or even came out today. Um, and that's really important. Now, when you're looking at something that's being renewed so often, for example, COVID information, studies have come out in this pace and sometimes they like don't line up. Sometimes one of the resources doesn't agree with another one. And so we actually look for that in science and we see if things are replicable. And so if it's very, very new, like COVID research, it's the best we have, but it's probably not going to be completely right. So that's probably why you've noticed some things that have been inconsistent in the news about what to do about COVID. Like originally they were like, don't worry about wearing a mask, or it sounded like they were saying, don't worry about a mask. But what they were really saying is, we need the masks for the nurses and the doctors because they're actually working with COVID patients. So please don't go out and buy a whole bunch of masks and then we don't have any left. Okay, so really look at when the information was founded, and that will help you figure out if it is a good source. Because really, when we evaluate a source, we're just trying to figure out how to get good information. And the internet has made it really hard to get good information, honestly. We thought it was going to connect everyone with information, but it kind of is not doing that. Well, it is, but a lot of the information isn't true. Okay, relevance. Is it important for your needs? So depending on your need, like the resource would be different, right? If you are trying to write a love letter to your girlfriend, then you probably don't want to look at an article that's about parabolas, right? And math. Like you're going to have to look at something else. In science class, we're really going to focus on, is the information related to your topic? You don't want to include a whole bunch of resources that don't help you on anything. Who is the intended audience? That's a big one. If there's any money involved in the resource, so like if somebody is making money or someone was given money to create the source, there's a lot of times going to be a bias. And remember, a bias is when something is trying to persuade you either way. And there's really intentional biases, like oil companies, for example. Remember, we learned a couple of lessons ago that they did a whole bunch of research on climate change, and they were like, oh shoot, global warming is a real thing and we're gonna have to like do something about it. The scientists were saying that to them, and the scientists were paid by the oil companies, but then the oil companies were like, no, we want to keep making money doing what we're doing, so we're going to spread a whole bunch of false information. So that audience was the American people, but the people who made it, of course, we're making it to try to get us to not change our behaviors for climate change, but to instead keep buying things so that they could keep making money. So that's why the audience is really important. And then, of course, you don't want to look anything up that's too easy or way too advanced for you. So there's something called a peer-reviewed journal. That's a journal where scientists publish their research. And in order to put something in a peer-reviewed journal, you have to have a whole bunch of other scientists read your research and basically say if it's good or not. Like if it's not good enough, they'll be like, no, they did all these things wrong. You can't publish this article. But those articles are basically made for other scientists to read. So sometimes we have to have people interpret them for us. So when you're looking at the relevance of a resource, if you look at the peer-reviewed journal itself, it might be really hard to understand it. And that's why there's science reporters a lot of times at the big news places, because they take that information and they kind of like translate it down so that your average Joe can know about it. By average Joe, I mean me too sometimes, because sometimes it's really hard stuff they're working on. Look at a variety of sources. I can't really stress this enough. You have to look at a lot of things before you decide what you're actually going to believe and make actions based on. And that's in class and that's in life too. All right, and then this is, would you be comfortable using it for a research paper? Thankfully, you don't have to write a research paper in this class because they're actually pretty hard, but you have to have really good resources to do a research paper. And if you're going to be doing something think about it, like if you're going to be making a big decision in your life, like what to be when you grow up, you kind of want to do research about it. And if you wouldn't include it in a research paper, if it's not good enough information for that, you probably don't want to help it inform your decision about what you're going to do. Okay, the source of the information is this first A, which is authority in the CRAAP test. And the authority basically means who wrote it, who paid for it, what is the person who is sharing this information with me. There are people who have really good authority on different subjects. So, like if I was looking for spiritual advice, like I'm a semi-religious person. I go to church and I do get advice from the church authority, like the person that I trust most at church. I'll ask him questions about God and stuff because I know that he's going to give me information that I find credible because he knows a lot, he's had a lot of experience, and then I just actually know him pretty well. So he would be the person I go to on this. Now, would I ask him about evolution? I would not, because he's not a science person. I would have to go to a science resource about that. And the good news is he doesn't try to tell me like crazy stuff. Like some churches were like, we can go to church and we won't get the COVID because God's gonna save us. But I'm like like God lets you get cancer, God lets you do all this other stuff. Why would God keep you from getting the COVID at church? Anyways, I don't know. That's probably a biased statement from me right there, so you can ignore that. What are their qualifications or credentials? So credentials and organizations mean what university do they work at? Do they have what kind of degree do they have? Like, do they have a degree at all? If they don't have a degree, a lot of times when it's science information, it is not going to be credible. Can you contact them with a publisher or email address to ask further questions? Scientists are always talking to each other and writing papers together, so they often leave their contact information so that they can get together and do that. The URL will actually tell you a lot about the source because different domains are required for different things. Like you can't get a .edu address unless you are actually an edu or you're a criminal organization and then you have an edu website until they find you out and then take it away from you. But .coms are going to be commercial, so this means like businesses. I know Las Montañas says .com. I wish we could change it to edu, and I hope we will. I'm going to move for that because we are actually an unbiased source of information. We're an educational organization. Usually you can trust .edus, although there are some crazy universities that teach about things that I would not consider credible, so you still have to look it up. Is this a research university? Is this university funded by, like a university funded by a Catholic church? They actually still get a lot of good research out of them. But I'm personally a I'm a Protestant, and a lot of the universities that are like Christian universities, you can't trust their science information. So you have to be careful with .edus still. Okay, .gov, that's going to be the government agencies. And for most of my life, okay, so you guys, a lot of people distrust the government. And I don't blame them because there's been a lot of disenfranchisement over history by the government. Like you can look at there was these studies called the Tuskegee experiments, which you can look up if you want. The US government did that. It was experiments on human beings. It was very unethical and it was also racist. And so I totally understand that there is apprehension about government agencies. And then now I feel like the current administration has done some things to make the EPA and other organizations weakened, and so you can't always believe what they're saying. But for the most part, .govs are going to be trustworthy because the people who are working in these places are not trying to mislead the American public. Are not part of a conspiracy theory. They're just trying to give you good information and keep you safe and comfortable in this lovely country where we live. .orgs can go either way. If it is a nonprofit like there's liberal nonprofit organizations and conservative ones. So you really need to look at like where are they getting their information from? If they are getting it from educational resources like research universities, then you can probably believe what they're saying. If they're making things up, then you probably can't. And then there's also .nets, which mostly I don't see very many .nets in research papers. All right, so now accuracy. You're going to consider how correct. Please turn that. Like you need to have subtitles on or something. I'm making a video. So consider the reliability, truthfulness, and correctness of the content. So where does it come from? Is it supported by evidence? If it's an op-ed, that means like an opinion document. So somebody's actually like writing their opinion in an editorial, then that's going to be biased towards their opinion. So you can figure out if something biased means that they're trying to get you to believe a certain thing or do a certain thing. Facts, data, those are not usually going to have a bias. Although I will tell you that science isn't perfect, and throughout history there have been issues. Like most vaccine research is done only on white people, and so the frequency of genes is different in different populations. And so, like for example, with the COVID, more people of color are getting the COVID than white people. So if most of the research for vaccines is being done on white people, then that would be a bias. And so you can't consider any resource as perfect. You have to be skeptical and you have to look at it. And that's why I always recommend multiple resources on the same thing, because then you can get a good idea of what you're trying to learn about. The language in scientific articles is going to be free of emotion. So they're not talking about the best or the most important thing. They're just saying what they learned from the research. Okay. The purpose, why is it made? This bottom thing right here, political, ideological, cultural, religious, institutional, or personal biases, these are things that are kind of hard to figure out sometimes. Religious biases are usually pretty obvious, but cultural biases can be like for example, I'm just thinking if you have somebody who's an expert, but maybe they grew up in another country than the United States, and so English is their second language, they could write an article and they could know a lot of stuff. Like they could be totally an expert, but they're not good at writing an article in English because it's not their native language. And then that would make it look like there's a lot of errors, but that would really be a cultural bias against the article. So that's why I'm saying all of this depends. You have to look at, well, what are you using this information for? Who made it? Why did they make it? And I encourage you to make sure that you're not looking at something that's propaganda or opinion. Make sure it is fact when you are looking for something about making a decision in your life or learning about something. You want to look for facts. Unless it's about opinions, like fashion is not about facts, right? Fashion is about opinions. So in that case, then you totally go with opinions. Um, so you guys, the intent of the writer is also a big deal. Was this made to inform people, like just to teach them about something? Was it made to sell something? Commercials are never a trustworthy source because everybody's trying to sell things in commercials. So of course they're going to tell you that it's the most amazing and wonderful thing. And then is it made to entertain? Is it made to persuade you? So depending on the purpose of the media or the source you're looking at, it it will have a bias and you could use it appropriately or you could use it inappropriately. So, um, I hope this information is going to be helpful for you, not only in class, but in your life. I'll see you guys later.